Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Change Book Podcast. My name is Nicole Harvick, and I am your host for today. And as always, on Monday, we bring you another one of our amazing co-authors, and today is no exception. Today, we have Dr. Brian Hite with us. Welcome, Brian. How are you today?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
I am so glad you're here. When I read your bio, I was like, my gosh, I could talk to this guy for hours about just his bio alone. So, the first question I have for you today is why did you choose the Change Book?
There were a few reasons why I chose that book. I liked the idea that I didn't have to go through the process of publishing anything. That's always helpful. But more than that, the message of the Change book really resonated with me and what I care about and the message that I'm trying to put out with the people that I work with too. And that really just is that we're all works in progress, and that there are ways forward, and that there's never a dead end, and that even when we think we've gone off the path, we haven't. It's impossible to go off the path. Everything is the path. And I really just love that message, and I just appreciate the opportunity to be able to contribute my little piece to it.
Well, I'm so glad you're here for one. And, like I said, when I read your bio, it's like, where does one start? But one of the things I know about you is that you are a Hollywood stuntman.
That's true.
And
That's true.
we had to actually change times today because you got called into work earlier than you thought. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's something I've been doing for 30 years. It's something that I enjoy. I love it. It's part of who I am. It's a lot of what made me me over the 3 decades of that work. It's my tribe, it's my people. I love everything about it. So the opportunities that I have to be on set and to work on these shows, I'm grateful to still have them at the age that I am, which is 51. And I'm going to continue to do it as long as my body's able to do it, and as long as people are willing to hire me. I will take the jobs. But it really is something that I've enjoyed, and it's a big part of the work that I do too, because for a long time I really struggled with which hat am I going to wear today? Like you said, I do a lot of things. I'm a stuntman. I'm an author. I'm a coach. I'm a dad. From minute to minute, day to day, I'm doing a lot of different things. And here lately, over the past year, it feels like everything's kind of coalesced. Like the different paths have merged into this organization that I'm running now. That's Brian Hite Global, where I'm able to use that experience that I have in the stunt world, specifically working in a high stakes environment regularly, where consequences matter and mistakes are costly. And, how do we get ourselves into a place mentally, physically, emotionally, socially, to where we can perform to our potential consistently in those environments? That's really what fascinates me. And I didn't know that that's really the direction I wanted to go. I knew that the sports psychology piece, which is what my master's is in, and organizational psychology is my Ph.D. All of those touched on these areas of how do we ensure that we're at our best and that we're bringing the best of who we are, regardless of what environment we find ourselves in. But this, over the past year, really melding in that stunt piece, that high stakes environment piece. And I call it high stakes environment on purpose, because a lot of people call it a high pressure environment. And for reasons we can get into if you'd like, I disagree with that conceptualization of it. But in high stakes environments, really allowing for my past to come together in a way that it really hasn't before. I feel more whole than I have in a lot of years. So
That's really interesting because I oftentimes feel the same way. I look back and things that I never thought would tie in all of a sudden tie in, and you look back, you're like, okay, now I get it. Now I see why I had to go through that, or why I had to do that, or how it's helping me today. So that's really interesting. And one thing you did leave out is that you are a PhD.
yes, I got a doctorate degree in organizational psychology and a master's degree in sports psychology. And I'm a faculty member at Grand Canyon University too, for those familiar with that. I'm a dissertation chair. I work with their doctoral students in general psychology, sports psychology, and organizational psychology.
Wow. So you don't have much spare time, do you?
There's, time is time. I think that every minute that we spend is that's part of our experience. That's part of our lives. I don't even know what spare time is. It's all time, and we use it how we use it, and that's the best we could do.
That's awesome. I think that's wonderful. So let's talk about, I know one of the things right now you have is you're talking about a 6-week course on mental coaching. Is that correct?
No, there are some 6-week courses, and I do the coaching around mental training, but they're focused on specific things. So I have 3 programs that I'm really working through right now, both in terms of individual coaching, group coaching, as well as creating some courses for them, and eventually a book. And pressure is the one that I'm focusing on first. But the 3 are pressure, motivation, and a 4-phased approach to performance that I developed with some colleagues when I was working with the Army. I spent 10 years working as a sport performance psychology consultant for the Army. And during that time, we really started to try to figure out, okay, well, what's a way that we can provide a foundation for the use of some of these mental skills that we're teaching in a way that's not overwhelming, in a way that integrates naturally with the flow of any performance, truly any performance. Doesn't have to be getting hit by a car on a set, or playing a soccer game or anything like that. I'm talking about just daily things like job interviews, or challenging conversations with a spouse, or disciplining a kid. These are all performances that we want to be at our best during. And each of them has these 4 phases in common, meaning they have a before, they have a right before, they have a during, and they have an after. And the before, during, and after, that's not new. People have been talking about things in those terms for a long time. But from the stunt work that I've done, what I've really honed in on, and what I really try to pay a lot of attention to with my clients, is that right before place, because that's where we transition from our regular walking around state of whatever kind of preparation and living that we might be in, to the place physically, mentally, and emotionally that we need to be to perform when they call action, whatever form that takes in the performance that we have. When somebody calls action and it's time to go, how do you get yourself from that regular walking around state to that performance state? Because they're 2 different things. So those are the 4 phases. And once the performance is over, once you've expended the energy, how do you, number 1, recover that energy? And how do you, number 2, learn from that experience so that you can do better next time? And that's the thing with most of our performances. They're not one-off deals. Now, you may not do the exact same thing again, but you're going to do something similar. And even if you didn't, what you took away from this particular performance can be generalized and be used in other situations as well. So that's the
Interesting.
4-phased approach to performance
And
program.
can you kind of just very briefly give us step 1, 2, 3, and 4 and how that would play out?
Yeah, well, phase 1 is the before phase. So this can start an hour before, it can start a day before, it can start a week before. It really is up to the performer and what the performance is that we're talking about. But it involves, and I break this down in this way: physical, mental, emotional, social. So physically, what are we doing to prepare? How are we eating? How are we sleeping? What kind of
Mm,
exercise are we getting? Mentally, how are we preparing? Are we using mental imagery to rehearse what it is that's going on? What types of thoughts are we thinking? What type of approach, like attitude, do we have? Do we have an optimistic approach, or an avoidance approach? Are we
mm,
looking at it as an opportunity or as a
this is
threat?
me.
And then the
Yeah.
emotional piece that comes from how we're thinking about it. What is our emotional state in this situation? Are we afraid? Are we excited? Are we trepidatious? There are a lot of different emotional states that we can have. So where do we need to be in order to prepare? Then again, we transition to that right before, when performance is imminent, when we know. So for me, when I'm doing stunts, when I show up on set, that's the before. So I'll stretch a little bit. We'll do some rehearsals. I'll figure out what it is that we're going to do. We all get on the same page around what all that stuff is. And then I sit around and wait, usually for hours, before we start to do something. And that's all the before phase. I can't get myself into a performance state and then remain that way for 7-8 hours. That's just not feasible. So I keep myself in a plan. I rest, or I'll get up and I talk to people, or I rehearse in my mind what it is that's going on. But then they say, okay, Brian, we're ready for you on set. Now is when I transition into the right before, because performance is imminent. It's coming. So now I get my energy activation level where it needs to be. I create the bubble, is what I call it, around myself. Other people call it flow or the zone. I think of it as a bubble, and I make it for myself. There's nothing else that's part of my attentional awareness other than task relevant things. Whatever is relevant in this moment to what I'm doing, that's all that makes it inside the bubble. And then they call action, and I'm in the middle of whatever the performance is. I keep my attention where it needs to be focused. I manage and regulate my energy activation levels and emotions. I communicate effectively and pay attention to where everybody else is from a social level. And then it ends. They call cut, and we move on to the next thing. And if I'm not going to do it again, then right then, that's when I recover the energy. I'll do some breathing. I'll do some progressive muscle relaxation, just really quick. It's not like a lie down, meditate type of a deal, but I'll do some quick things that will recover some energy. And I will experience whatever the emotions are that I experience. I will accept those. It may be frustration, it may be elation, it may be relief, whatever it is that I'm experiencing. I allow myself to experience it, allow it to come down on its own through the relaxation, the breathing that I'm doing. And then, and only then, do I start to reflect on, okay, how did that go? What went well that I want to keep? What didn't go as well that I want to change? So that's the approach that I take with that 4-phase approach to performance.
That's fascinating. And when you're on a movie set, are you working with those people, helping them get through the steps, or are you just observing and
not officially, and certainly not in any kind of capacity? If it's sort of like, as a sport performance psychology consultant, the last person who wants to hear me and all the things that I have to teach is my kid. So I have to sneak it in. I have to be covert in what it is that I say and the guidance that I provide, because if I try to do it explicitly, it just gets blocked out. And it's kind of the same way in the stunt world. I have to sneak in some of the information with some of the people who are out there. But ultimately, it just comes down to me. I'm in charge of my performance and my mental state and what it is that I'm doing, and that's what I apply this to. Now, the other two programs are interesting too. One is motivation, and that one I've kept because through the decade that I worked with the Army, regularly, consistently, when I would do classes with leaders, I would lead off with the question, what is the biggest challenge that you face as a leader? And inevitably, the answer would come back, motivation. How do I get these people to do what I want them to do when I want them to do it, but without poking and prodding and carrot and stick? Like, how do I get them to understand the value and the importance of what it is that's happening so that they just do it on their own and I don't have to try to make them? How do I do that? So there was so I developed a course on motivation that I started to deliver with the military and did that for years. And I've now transitioned that into the other realm where I can do that with, yes, athletes and other performers, but in organizations as well, from the CEO level right on down through middle management, et cetera. Anybody who leads people. And truly, my definition of leader is a little bit different from everybody else's, I think, because I think of every single one of us as a leader. And the reason for that is because every single one of us interacts with people every day. And anytime we interact with somebody, we are influencing that person. We can't help it. That's just how humanity works. Anytime we are interacting with somebody, we are influencing them. And to me, that's the definition of leadership. If we are influencing other people, that's a leader. So for me, I have a very liberal, open definition of leadership, but I believe that anybody can learn, not just for their own level of motivation, what affects the levels of motivation and the various sources of motivation, what goes on with that. But at the leadership level, it becomes about not motivating other people. We can't do that. I can't motivate you. There's no thing that I can do that will reliably every single time motivate you to do something. Now, I can create an environment that will foster motivation. In other words, even if I were to offer you $1 million to go do, I don't know, a pull-up or something, you might be very, very motivated to go do the pull-up and because you want the $1 million. But if I were to offer that same $1 million to, say, I don't know, Jeff Bezos or something, $1 million, it takes a whole nother meaning, so they don't care as much. And that's the whole thing, is I cannot motivate somebody, but I can create an environment. I can create conditions where motivation is likely to be fostered. And that's what it is that I train leaders to do. And the one that's most interesting to me, honestly, has been this, the pressure, the direction on pressure. because I hear it all the time. We got to learn how to perform well under pressure. Or we got to figure out how to perform under pressure, or people choke under pressure, like all this stuff around pressure, like it's like pressure situations. We got to do well in pressure situations. I don't think that's even a thing. I don't believe pressure situations exist. I'm more on the Stoic philosophy side of this one, where, like Epictetus says, it's not circumstances that define how we do things. It's about how we judge those circumstances. That's what determines how we think about them and interact and react. That's a horrible quote from him, but it's the same idea, in that this is not the situation itself that will determine whether pressure is experienced or not. It's how we perceive that situation. It's where our attention is focused and how we are thinking about that situation. For example, if I'm in a situation, well, I'll just give you an example from the stunt world. I was working on a show. This was years ago, 20 years ago. It was a show called VIP. Pamela Anderson was the star of the show.
Mm-hmm.
And my job was I was in the back of this U-Haul truck that was driving down the road. And at a certain point in the driving down the road, I'm supposed to come out the back of the truck like I'd been thrown, hit the ground and roll. Well, before that stunt, I was feeling an incredible amount of pressure. There were some very high level, very important, very influential stunt people standing right off to the side, staring at me, watching this happen. And I had a stunt coordinator who had taken a chance on me. I was relatively new at the time. He brought me in and gave me this opportunity, knowing that these other people were going to be there. And he trusted me. So I didn't want to let him down. And these are the types of thoughts that were going on in my mind. I don't want to let the stunt coordinator down. If I screw this up, he's going to look bad. If I get hurt, then how am I going to work? I can't pay my bills. If I screw this up too, I mean, look at all the people who are sitting here watching. I'm never going to get hired again. These people, it's word's going to get around by tomorrow that I screwed. So these are the types of thoughts that I was having, and I was experiencing a great deal of pressure as a result. Now, cut to about a month ago, I was working on a TV show called The Righteous Gemstones.
That's here in South Carolina, I think.
It is, in Charleston. Yep, I sure was. I was up in Charleston, and again, there I am in the back of a truck. It's driving down the road. My job, the truck hits a bump, the back of the thing flies up. I come out the back, hit the ground, and roll. So basically the same situation. Still important people, big name people watching, and stunt coordinator. I didn't want to let them down, etc. But I felt no pressure in that situation. And as I look back on it and really ask myself why, a few things came to mind. But before I get into it, I just want to point out, those are almost identical situations. And if there were such a thing as a pressure situation, one would think that coming out the back of a moving vehicle while all these people are watching would be one of those situations, right? But in one case it was, and in the other case it wasn't. So it's just, for me, evidence that there is no such thing as a pressure situation. So what is it that causes the pressure? Well, if our attention is focused on the outcome, and more accurately, the consequences of that outcome. So if I'm focused on screwing up, yes, but that's only a problem because of the consequences that will come out of that screw up, right? So if I'm thinking again about screwing up, I'm not going to get hired again. These people are going to think I'm horrible. They're going to look down on me. They're going to talk badly about me. This is where pressure lives. Where pressure doesn't live, where it can't live, is in the moment, in the present moment. Pressure cannot exist in that moment. If my attention is on those things that I can do right now, this second, that create conditions that maximize the likelihood of success, then pressure is not going to be there. Now, I can't guarantee success by keeping my attention where it needs to be in this moment, but I can certainly maximize the likelihood. And it's an example that I use all the time with soccer. I mean, if you ask somebody, what do you want to do? I want to win the game. Great. You want to win the game. Terrific. That's the outcome. But how are you going to do that? Well, I want to score a goal. Okay. Again, great thing. You do need to do that. But how are you going to do that? Well, I'm going to dribble well. I'm going to pass well. I'm going to play aggressive defense. I'm going to, when I make mistakes, get back in the game really quickly. Yes, that's what you're going to do. Those are the things that, if you do them, will allow the outcome to manifest. In other words, we can't achieve the outcome itself. If our attention is on the outcome itself, we're actually missing the things that we need in order for that outcome to come true. And if we're focused on those things in the moment, pressure can't live there. It simply can't. So that's been a fun one to talk to some people about, to really challenge some of those conventional beliefs around, yeah, pressure, there's nothing we can do about it. It's inevitable. It's going to be there. And so we need to figure out how to perform well with it. And not only that, but pressure is helpful. It's beneficial. And to that, I simply say, well, I don't know that the pressure is helpful. In fact, I think that you're performing well in spite of the pressure, not because of it. But one thing the pressure does do that can be beneficial is that it amps up our energy activation levels. And I mentioned this earlier during the performance discussion. Each of us, for any given performance, has an ideal energy activation level. And whatever that energy activation level is, we need to figure out how to achieve it and sustain it. And pressure is one of those things that does boost our energy activation level. Because what's happening is, if we're thinking about the consequences and the ramifications of what it is to do things that are wrong, and I'll get to what's right in a second, but what we're doing is we're perceiving a threat, and our body will go into threat protection mode, which activates the sympathetic nervous system, which boosts our energy activation level. So we're getting an energy activation level boost that could prove helpful in these performance situations, but there are plenty of other ways to get that same physiological boost that don't pull our attention away from those task relevant things that we really need to focus on in order to succeed.
And you know, I want to take you back to one thing you said that I really latched onto, is you said you look at everybody as a leader. And that's part of you being a leader, is to do that. And I'm just going to give you a quick example of, like, my dad, who's older, but he says, no, I'm a filler. I'm a filler. There can't be leaders unless there's people like me that are fillers, that just stand in the audience or watch on TV. How do you convince someone that we all have that power of leadership in us?
Well, it's all about the circumstance, you know. I mean, if I'm in one situation and I'm recognizing my influence over other people, I can recognize that from a leadership perspective. And by that, I simply mean that I can deliberately and intentionally speak and behave in ways that reflect the type of values that I would like to have lived out by everybody around me. To me, that's a big part of leadership, is emulating the values that you want to expand out to the greater organization or greater society. So that, to me, is what is an example of leadership. Now, you can't, there are only so many cooks you can have in the kitchen. So if you're talking about leadership in terms of being in charge of stuff and making decisions about who does what, that's a different, yes, there are leaders who do that. Again, my definition of leadership encompasses that. You certainly can have those people because they are also influencing others. But I would argue that even those fillers, if they're interacting with another person, they are influencing that person. And that influence can be intentional, or it can just be unconscious. And if it's unconscious, then we just have to hope that we're doing it right in that moment. And you know what? We're human.
Fingers
so often
crossed.
we don't, you know? And so I think that the more that we're aware, and this is something that's in my chapter of the change, is really, it's this idea of beginning with self-awareness of how are we thinking in situations? How are we interacting with others? Are we living out the values that we really believe are important and hold strongly to? And if we are living them out, what does it look like? And could we live them out even further or better or differently? That's step one. And then step two is around acceptance. So this is more in the resilience realm, but we accept things as they are, not from a resignation standpoint of, all right, well, this is just how it is, so I guess I just got to take it. You know, it's not about that. It's about accepting the truth of the circumstances rather than either trying to ignore or gloss over and try to sugarcoat things and pretend like, you know, the camel's not a camel. It really is a camel. It's not a horse. It's not a Pegasus. There's no unicorn there. It's a camel. That's what it is. So let's just accept that that's the case. And once we can accept what is, now we can start taking action that is helpful, that's productive, that's beneficial, not only for ourselves, but for those around us as well.
Yeah, I like, and one thing I want to ask you before our time's up is, you said were you in the Army enlisted, or did you just
No, no,
work
no, no,
with
no.
them?
I was a contractor. I worked for a
Okay.
contracting company for the Army. It and it had various names. I don't know what it's called now. I think the program's still around. I've been out of it for a couple of years, but yeah, I worked as a contractor with a lot of people. It was a great job because I was working with privates right on up to generals. And I worked with infantry, I worked with artillery, I worked with cavalry, I worked with support units, worked with special forces, other special operations units. I really was a very I got to see a lot of different parts of the Army and at a lot of different levels, and really see how these different skills and concepts integrate and are important and can be leveraged in each of those environments.
Yeah, and how was that for you? Because I'm having military in my family. Oftentimes they see like this. There's no like this. So how did that go
Yeah.
for you?
Yeah, it's funny. That was some great training for me because, inevitably, if I was standing in front of a group of soldiers, half of them would be sitting back in their seats, arms crossed, looking at me like, all right, civilian dude, what do you got for me? Teach me how to do my job better. And I mean, that was just the attitude. And so it was up to me to hook them and to get them hooked within, I'd say 3 minutes would be best, but the stunt thing gave me a little bit of leeway. Like they would give me a little, they extended my time a little bit. They give me
Ooh,
maybe 5 minutes to
ooh,
hook
he's a
them, you
movie
know?
star.
Well, it's not even that. It was more the fact that I have been in situations where if you do it wrong, you or somebody around you may not go home. I've been
Ooh,
in those
very powerful.
situations, you
Yeah.
know, I understand what that's like. And it's, and so that I think just bought me a little bit more time. But then once I started talking about the skills and really connecting it to the challenges that they face daily, either as leaders or just even in their jobs, it really started to make sense. And over time, I'd worked with enough where I had enough military stories. But even before I did, I was able to just ask them. So, hey, look, I'm not an expert in this. I'm an expert in what I'm talking about, but not your job and how it applies. So you tell me. I'm going to tell you this stuff. Now you tell me how that's relevant to you. You tell me how you can make that work in your job place, where what you do and the role that you play. And that was a terrific approach too, because it just put the ball back in their court, and they had to pay attention to what I was talking about in order to answer that question and to connect the dots there. So it was great training. It truly was. There's no audience that anybody could put me in front of that was
Ooh,
more that would be more hostile than a group
I know.
of senior enlisted people at the Army level. It was wonderful, wonderful experience.
Good. So both sides learned something, right? So it
Absolutely.
was
Yeah.
a win-win for
Yeah.
everyone.
Yeah. And I tell them all the time too. I taught the same classes with the same slides. I don't even know how many times, but it never got boring because every single class had new people in it and new stories from them came out of it and new perspectives and new takes on the information I was putting out always happened, and different discussions even between the different people in the classes happened that were, it always stayed interesting. And so that was, I did enjoy that part of that job.
Oh, wow. And Brian, we are coming to the end of our time, and I would like you to give the audience a golden nugget of just one way that you can not only boost their spirits, but let them know that everyone can be a leader if they choose in some
Yeah.
capacity.
Well, I'm not sure about leadership, but one thing I've thought a lot about is opportunity. Some people question the frequency of opportunities, how often they come up. And in my opinion, I believe opportunities come fairly frequently, but I think we missed them, or at least missed benefiting from them, for three reasons. I think three things have to come together for us to take advantage of opportunity. One is openness. We have to be open enough to recognize when opportunity is happening in the first place. We can't be so fixated on one set place, one set direction, that we're not open and available to the environment around us and to the people that we interact with to recognize those opportunities when they happen. And then once we have recognized the opportunity through the openness, then we need to be flexible enough to change from whatever our direction is now to the new direction, to that new opportunity. For example, maybe my goal that I set was to get a degree. Okay, well, that's a long process. And now a year later into that, I've gotten a new job. Maybe I've gotten married or had a kid. Life is different in whatever way that it is. So whereas the goal was excellent when I first set it a year ago, now the goal, it needs to be adapted. So we can't become so fixated and rigid in our direction. We have to be flexible enough to say, all right, well, that goal was fine at the time that I set it, but now I want a new goal. Now I'm okay changing. I'm okay dropping this other one. I'm not going to feel guilty about it. I'm going to feel excited about this new opportunity that I have. And then the third thing, and this is where I think a lot of people fall short, and unfortunately, it's what holds up a lot of people, is courage. We have to have that courage to take that first step, because we can recognize the opportunity and we can see the value of it and even be flexible enough to say, yeah, that's probably what I should do. But to actually do it takes courage. And that's really where, I don't know. I wish more people didn't fall short in that place. And that's something I always keep in mind in my own life and with my own kids. So that's what I have for you. Opportunities, they happen regularly, but in order to take advantage of them, we have to be open, we have to be flexible, and we need that courage to take that first step.
That's wonderful, because that's what I've told my kids is the minute you step over the fear, you're free. You're absolutely free. Just do it and you never look back. So Brian, this has been an amazing interview. I'm just like, wow, this is great. So thank you for agreeing to come on. For our audience watching today, I have put so many links for Brian. If you can't find him, it's your fault, because I've got a lot of links in there, and I would highly recommend everybody reaching out to you, because you encompass a lot of answers for people that have a lot of questions. So thank you so much for coming on. I'm very grateful. It's been a pleasure to meet you. And for my guests out there, please reach out to this guy. Maybe he can even get you a spot on a TV show. Who knows?
Who knows? You never know what opportunities come up. We just got to be open to them.
Open.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay. Thank you, Brian.